Hi guys, zonal enemies, what does it mean? Well, at the moment, if you've been following the last two AI tutorials in terms of making an enemy and making an enemy that randomly spawns, you'll notice that we have created a level with a few walls, an enemy that when we press play will try and find the shortest route to get to our main character. The problem is that he chases the main character straight away. Now that's not so much of a problem on this because this is more of a sandbox level where you can go anywhere and it's also quite small. But what if we've got a really long linear level and the enemies right at the end of the level start advancing towards the player instantly? That means that as you get towards the end of the level, there's going to be no enemies left and you will have had quite a hard slog at the beginning. So zonal enemies is basically being able to use different navigation meshes in order to ensure that the enemy doesn't move out of its current zone. So one way of doing this is to duplicate the enemy and the nav mesh and the main area. Let's have a look at how to do that. So we double click to duplicate and move it over. And because the programming is the same, let's see what happens there. So if we press P for play, what happens is the enemy behind me will come after me. However, the enemy over here reaches the end of its nav mesh and it stops. So I guess you could say that one way of having different zones is just to create different nav meshes with a gap between them. You can see that there's a gap between them here and it ensures that the enemy stops. But what if you don't want the enemy to move until you're in their zone? Perhaps you'd station them outside of an elevator that they've got to guard or something like that. What if you don't want them to move at all? Well, let's have a look at how to do that. In order to do anything that involves sort of counting or truths, you need to use some sort of property. And if we click on the enemy at the minute, it is set to always move towards us. So we need to create a game property. Now your game properties will be on the left hand side of the screen. I'm going to select the main character and click this game property here. And we're going to call it move. And it's going to be an integer so it can count. And at the moment we're going to leave it as 0, which is going to be basically don't move. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a property over here on the left called move. And if our move property that we've just created over here equals 1, then join that to the AND logic gate, so it will always, as long as the move property equals 1, move. Now at the moment we know it equals 0. So if we press play, it doesn't go anywhere. But if we change this property to 1 and press P, it moves because the property is true. It's fulfilling the criteria of the AND logic gate. So I'm going to set that back to 0 because we want our enemies to be static to begin with. So dead simple then. All I'm going to do is I'm going to add, so I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to put the cube here. I'm going to make the cube taller than my character can jump through. It's going to be reasonably thin, but it is going to be reasonably tall as well. So let's make it quite thin. I'm just going to lift this up a little bit and move it across. And I'm going to call it Z1M for zone 1 move. This is zone 1 at the minute. And in a moment, we're going to make zone 2 over here. And I'm going to give it quite a bright material. And again, Z1M, zone 1 move. I'm going to make it a ghost so I can walk through it. And I'm also going to make it invisible. And once I've done that, I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to put it over here as well. So I'm just going to move it this way. Get that centered and pull this down and across this way. And again, make it reasonably thin, and just move that over. Now in the game, that shouldn't make any difference whatsoever, and actually we might want to consider building the whole level before we go through and start sticking these in. But if we press P for play, you can't see them anyway, so it makes absolutely no difference. All we're going to do then for our character is we've said that we've set up this condition here, and we're going to look out for two messages. This is going to be called go, and the subject is going to be go, lowercase, and another message that says stop, and all lowercase. I'm going to write stop. And what I'm then going to do is add a property sensor called go, and it's going to assign the move property 1 and join it to there. And I'm going to add another one, a message. Oh, sorry, I'm going to add another property, and I'm going to call it stop. And I'm going to assign move 0. So this is getting interesting now. Basically, if the cube here receives a message that says go, it's going to change this property to 1, which, as I've just demonstrated, will make it move. However, if it receives a message that says stop, it's going to stop. Now, our bad guy here is called bad guy 001. We need to bear that in mind. But all we're going to do is we're going to click on these walls, and perhaps I should have done this before I duplicated it. So I'm going to delete this wall. I would have done this bit of programming on this wall had I set about this again, and I think you guys probably should. But what I'm going to do for this wall is I'm basically going to say to it, if you collide with my main player, player 1, I think this one is player 1.001, whatever your player is. Yep, it's that one. Then I'm going to send that message. And the message is going to be to the bad guy 001, and it's just going to simply say go. So whenever we hit the red wall, we want to go, basically. And I'm just going to pull that in slightly. Let's test it. So the bad guy stays still. If I hit the wall, it sends a message and the bad guy starts walking. Good stuff. So why did we do all that? Well, let's make another zone. So I'm going to copy this wall. I'm going to copy the floor, the nav mesh, and the enemy. So I'm going to come up to the top. I'm going to double click to duplicate. This is actually an idea that I've only come up with today, guys. So I've not actually tested this out. So I'm presuming this is going to work. I'm sort of doing this on the fly here in order to help you guys out. But I'm pretty confident that it will work. So, we've got two different zones now, and what I'm going to do for this one is I'm actually going to change the message on here, because this message, this bad guy now here is called bad guy 000. So if I hit player 1, then we want to send a message to bad guy 000. And the message is go. So how does that sort of work? You'll notice that neither of them move. And if I hit the first wall, the first player goes, which is pretty cool. And if I hit the second wall, the second player starts to move. Brilliant. What I want them to do though is I want the first player to actually stop if I leave the zone. So he's not sort of just running up and down the wall, a little bit like when you get a magnet underneath a desk with something metal on the top, which seems to be what the enemy to the left of me is doing. It wouldn't make sense for him to stop dead in his tracks there. He should really be chasing me across zones, but as we know, we don't want to do that because we don't want all the enemies running all the way through. So all we need to do then is we also need to get, if we have the collision for this one, it sends a message to this enemy, and it sends a message saying change your property to 1 so that you can go. But what if it also sent a message to this one saying stop, change your property to 0? Well, let's do that. So we've had a collision. We're going to go to message, and we're going to send another one to, this guy was called bad guy 001, and it was called stop. What's going to happen then, I'm going to link that back to there. What's going to happen is it's going to change the property of this to 1 from 0, and it's going to change the property of this one to 0 from 1. Let's do the reciprocal of that as well. Let's click the other wall and add a message actuator. And let's change it to, this guy was bad guy 000. And let's say stop. And link it in. Okay, let's see what that does. So at the beginning, it doesn't do anything. So what I'm going to do for this first guy is I'm going to change his property to 1 to begin with, which means he's going to move straight away. So if I play, he comes chasing after me. If I go through the wall, the other guy starts chasing after me, and the first guy stops. So he stops dead in his tracks. So now if I come down this way, I've got stuck behind something, I think. If I come down this way and cross the zones again, the other bad guy stops and this bad guy starts chasing me. And what that's going to do, guys, is it's going to keep your enemies in their zone. Now, I realise that this was a little bit complicated. Once you've done it a few times, we could just modify these zones so that we could have more than one zone. But as you can see, it's starting to really bring a new level of artificial intelligence to our enemies. Awesomeness rating, about 7 million, guys, if you can get this style working, because you're going to be looking at getting an A, or the equivalent of a distinction, for your enemies and the AI that you've tried to do. It's really high level stuff for BTEC, this, guys. So if you can do it, do it. Good luck. Can't wait to see what you can do.